In the suffocating heat of April 1865, a man stumbled into the federal garrison at New Orleans with stories so horrifying that even battle-hardened Union officers questioned his sanity. Samuel Washington, 23 years old, former slave turned free laborer, arrived at Fort Jackson with torn clothes, fresh wounds, and eyes that had witnessed unspeakable horrors. What he told investigators would uncover one of the most disturbing cases of post-Civil War America, a tale of the plantation mistress who had turned her Louisiana estate into a house of horrors where workers entered but never left. "She still thinks she owns us," Samuel whispered to Captain Theodore Morrison. "Mrs. Beaumont. She don't understand the war is over." The Beaumont plantation sat like a rotting tooth in the Louisiana landscape, 30 miles southwest of New Orleans, surrounded by cypress swamps and Spanish moss hanging like funeral shrouds. Margaret Beaumont, 52 years old, had inherited the estate when her husband died at Gettysburg. Unlike other plantation owners struggling with emancipation, Margaret had found a different solution. She advertised for free workers, former slaves desperate for employment. The pay was generous, accommodations comfortable, and she offered contracts during the economic chaos following the war. Samuel had arrived in February 1865, along with 11 other workers seeking honest employment. What they found was a carefully orchestrated nightmare disguised as work. "The first week was normal," Samuel told Captain Morrison. "Mrs. Beaumont seemed like a proper lady. Clean beds, good food, treated us with respect. But she had rules. Extensive, detailed, suffocating rules governing every aspect of our lives. Workers were forbidden from leaving without written permission. No visitors without Margaret's approval. Daily moral instruction sessions in the chapel. Most disturbing were Margaret's behavioral corrections for any infraction, no matter how minor. She had this little leather book," Samuel continued. "Wrote down everything we did wrong. Spoke too loud, that's a mark. Didn't bow properly, that's a mark. Get 5 marks, and you go to correction." Workers taken for correction either return hollow-eyed and refusing to speak, or never return at all. When Marcus questioned his friend Jacob's week-long absence, Margaret took Marcus for correction that same evening. He emerged 3 days later, completely changed, docile, obedient, absolutely terrified. But Samuel's most chilling revelation was yet to come. "Captain, what I'm about to tell you, Mrs. Beaumont ain't just punishing folks in that basement. She's keeping them. Some people we thought were dead are still down there, but they ain't the same people no more." Samuel's own scheduled correction had led to his escape. In the basement carved into Louisiana clay, gas lamps flickered along corridors lined with heavy doors bearing nameplates. Names of workers who had supposedly left months earlier. When the overseer Claude Thibodeau opened the door, Samuel saw Jacob sitting at a desk, writing in a journal. Jacob looked up at me and smiled. But it wasn't Jacob's smile. Someone else was wearing his face. He said, "Welcome to rehabilitation, Samuel. Mrs. Beaumont has such wonderful plans for your improvement." That's when I knew I had to run. Samuel's desperate escape through 30 miles of treacherous swamps had brought him to the Union garrison. Now, Captain Morrison faced a crucial decision about potentially dozens of missing people trapped in Margaret Beaumont's underground horror. Captain Morrison assembled federal marshals within hours. What they uncovered was a pattern so methodical, it revealed a mind that had been perfecting systematic horror for months. Between October 1864 and April 1865, exactly 12 free workers had vanished after taking employment at Beaumont Plantation. Each case followed an identical pattern. Arrived seeking work, signed contracts, worked for weeks or months, then vanished without collecting pay or personal belongings. Federal Marshal James Hendricks recognized the military precision. This wasn't random violence. This was systematic, planned, executed with calculated efficiency. The missing workers shared specific characteristics suggesting careful selection. Former slaves with no local family, literate but isolated, traveling alone when they arrived. Their absence wouldn't be immediately noticed. Isabella Chun, a seamstress from Natchez, had arrived in November 1864. Her last letter to her sister described increasing restrictions. "Mrs. Beaumont is very particular about proper behavior. We have prayers every morning and evening, lessons about moral improvement. I miss the freedom to come and go as I please. Thomas Mitchell, a skilled carpenter earning $15 per month, had disappeared in January. When letters stopped, his former master made inquiries, but was told Thomas had left suddenly for Texas. Margaret had prepared elaborate explanations for each disappearance. Forged resignation letters, staged personal belongings, fake witness testimonies. But Marshall Hendricks noticed critical inconsistencies. The resignation letters contained identical phrasing about seeking new opportunities. Items left behind were always worthless, never prized possessions or family heirlooms. Neighboring workers reported seeing lights in the Beaumont house late at night, hearing machinery, construction sounds, and occasionally screaming. Marie Boudreau, a cook at the neighboring plantation, provided disturbing testimony. I saw Mrs. Beaumont and that overseer moving large bundles from the main house to buildings behind the workers' quarters. Always at night, always secretive. The investigation revealed Margaret had been using Claude Thibodeau as more than an overseer. Claude, a Cajun man with no family, had become completely devoted to Margaret after her husband's death. He carried out the corrections and maintained absolute discipline. Hidden in Margaret's bedroom desk, investigators found ledgers documenting detailed psychological profiles of each worker, behavioral notes, and progress reports on moral rehabilitation. Most disturbing, entries for disappeared workers continued months after their supposed departures. Isabella Chen's entry, 3 months after she allegedly left for Texas, contained notes about her improved compliance and successful attitude adjustment. Thomas Mitchell's profile included observations about his reduced resistance to authority and acceptable submissiveness levels. Marshall Hendricks realized with growing horror these weren't records of dead workers. They were progress reports on living people still somewhere on the plantation, undergoing Margaret Beaumont's twisted rehabilitation process. The team prepared for a raid, but faced challenges. Margaret wasn't just any plantation owner. She was a Confederate colonel's widow with powerful political connections throughout Louisiana. Any action required overwhelming evidence and careful planning. Time was running out. 3 more workers had arrived at Beaumont Plantation the previous week, lured by Margaret's advertisements for good Christian employment. Dr. Antoine Boudreau, a local physician called to treat Beaumont workers on several occasions, provided the final piece of the puzzle. Marshall, what I saw in that plantation basement, Margaret Beaumont, isn't just keeping those people prisoner. She's changing them, breaking their minds and rebuilding them into something else entirely. And God help me, I think it might be working. What do you think is really happening so far? Share your theories in the comments. Dr. Boudreau's hands trembled as he revealed what would transform the investigation from criminal case to something that challenged understanding of human psychology itself. I was called to Beaumont Plantation. In December, he began. Mrs. Beaumont said a worker needed medical attention. When I arrived, I was taken not to workers' quarters, but into the main house basement. What I found was unlike anything in 30 years of medical practice. The underground complex stretched nearly a quarter-mile beneath the plantation grounds, with multiple levels carved deep into Louisiana clay. This wasn't hastily dug. The corridors were properly braced, walls lined with brick, even ventilation systems. Mrs. Beaumont had been planning this for years, probably since before her husband's death. The facility was divided into sections serving specific purposes in Margaret's moral rehabilitation program. The first level contained comfortable individual rooms, actually sophisticated prison cells for housing workers during early correction stages. Dr. Boudreau had been taken to the second level to treat Marcus Williams. Physically, he was unharmed, no injuries, no violent signs. But mentally, Marshall. Someone had reached into his mind and rearranged everything inside. Marcus sat completely docile, no longer restrained. He responded with perfect politeness, expressed genuine gratitude for Mrs. Beaumont's care, showed no desire to leave or contact the outside world. Most disturbing, Marcus seemed to have no memory of life before Beaumont Plantation. I asked about his family, previous work, hometown. He looked confused, as if I spoke a foreign language. When I mentioned his wife and children, he said, "Doctor, I believe you have me confused with someone else. I have always worked for Mrs. Beaumont. Margaret observed with detached scientific interest, explaining Marcus's condition as natural result of proper moral guidance and Christian discipline. She told Dr. Boudreau that Marcus had come as a broken man, corrupted by emancipation's false promises, and rehabilitation had helped him find peace by accepting his proper place in God's natural order. The third level revealed Margaret's workshop, rooms equipped with mechanical devices, chemical apparatus, and detailed charts tracking behavioral modification progress. She had been conducting systematic psychological experiments, testing combinations of isolation, sleep deprivation, repetitive instruction, and chemical substances to break down subject resistance and rebuild their personalities. She had charts documenting every aspect of their transformation, Dr. Boudreau said. Sleep patterns, food intake, responses to psychological pressure, physiological reactions to various chemicals. She was treating human beings like laboratory animals. Margaret used laudanum, morphine, and experimental compounds obtained through New Orleans medical contacts. Doses were calibrated not to cause permanent physical damage, but to create psychological dependency and compliance. Dr. Boudreau had been blackmailed into cooperation. Margaret offered him more money than he'd made in the previous year, but also threatened serious accusations about his wartime activities. He had visited monthly for 4 months, monitoring subjects' physical condition during their psychological transformation. The complete process involved initial good treatment, followed by systematic personality destruction once subjects earned corrections. Isolation came first, then sleep and sensory deprivation, then chemical treatments creating confusion and dependency. Subjects were shown presentations about their moral failings, ingratitude to former masters, and chaos that emancipation had brought. They recited these lessons daily, with rewards for compliance and severe punishment for resistance. The most effective technique was memory replacement, Dr. Boudreau revealed with revulsion. Using chemicals and psychological suggestion, she convinced subjects their memories of life before the plantation were false, implanted by radical abolitionists. Over time, subjects accepted Margaret's reality. They believed they had always worked for her, that she had saved them from outside chaos, and their highest purpose was serving her faithfully. The conditioning was so complete Margaret could allow them to move freely, confident they would never escape or contact the outside world. But Dr. Boudreau discovered something Margaret didn't realize. The psychological conditioning wasn't permanent. Without continuous reinforcement and chemical maintenance, subjects' original personalities began reasserting themselves. Several early subjects showed memory recovery signs, asking about their past, displaying increasing agitation. Margaret's solution was characteristically brutal. Subjects showing regression were taken to a fourth basement level that Dr. Boudreau had only glimpsed from his observations. He suspected Margaret was disposing of subjects whose conditioning failed, replacing them with new victims. Margaret Beaumont has created a system for destroying human souls and rebuilding them according to her twisted vision, Dr. Boudreau concluded. She believes she's conducting moral and scientific research, but she's really created the most sophisticated form of slavery ever devised. If we don't stop her soon, she'll perfect her methods and expand her operation. Thank you for staying with us. The most shocking part is still coming. Dr. Boudreau's testimony revealed more than Margaret's crimes. It exposed a network of complicity reaching into Louisiana's highest social levels. The sophistication, resources, and protection from investigation all pointed to extensive support systems. Judge Harrison Boudreau, Dr. Antoine's brother and prominent parish legal figure, had been dismissing missing person reports for months. Under federal pressure, he revealed Margaret had provided detailed documentation for each disappearance. Forged letters, witness statements, financial records showing final wage payments to workers who allegedly left voluntarily. Mrs. Beaumont understood legal procedures better than most attorneys. Judge Boudreau admitted every missing person report was met within days by complete files proving voluntary departure, perfect paperwork, signatures, dates, witnesses. I had no legal grounds to investigate further, but the judge's cooperation went beyond accepting documentation. He actively discouraged investigation by dismissing family member reports and threatening people with legal consequences for filing false reports. Father Michel Tran, the parish priest conducting daily moral instruction at Beaumont, had been aware workers were held underground but rationalized his participation as providing spiritual comfort during moral correction. Mrs. Beaumont convinced me she was operating a Christian rehabilitation program for former slaves corrupted by radical influences. Father Tran explained through tears. She said these people needed intensive moral guidance to overcome false teachings about equality and independence. Father Tran conducted religious services in the underground complex, preaching sermons specifically designed to reinforce Margaret's psychological conditioning. His sermons emphasized submission to authority, gratitude for benevolent care, and dangers of prideful independence. The most shocking revelation came from Margaret's financial records. The psychological experimentation and underground construction required resources far beyond a single plantation's means. Margaret had been receiving funding from a consortium of wealthy planners and politicians interested in her research into post-emancipation labor management. The Southern Agricultural Improvement Society included prominent names in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama politics. They provided financial support, chemical supplies, and political protection in exchange for detailed reports on behavioral modification techniques and their potential regional applications. Samuel Morrison, a wealthy New Orleans cotton merchant, had been the primary financial backer. His correspondence revealed their true ambitions, developing techniques to maintain white supremacy throughout the South despite emancipation. "The federal government has taken away our legal right to own these people," Morrison wrote to Margaret, "but they cannot take away our right to manage and guide them for their own benefit and society's good. Your research could provide scientific foundation for new benevolent supervision that even northern politicians couldn't object to." The consortium planned to establish similar rehabilitation facilities on plantations throughout the Deep South, disguised as educational institutions or charitable organizations. Margaret's plantation was the prototype and training center for regional-scale development. Marshall Hendricks realized he wasn't investigating a single criminal, but uncovering a conspiracy threatening to undermine emancipation itself. Margaret's sophisticated psychological techniques could maintain effective slavery after legal abolition, creating undetectable mental bondage. The network recruited new subjects through agents operating throughout the South, posing as labor contractors or charitable workers. They identified suitable candidates, literate former slaves with no local connections, and directed them to Beaumont with employment promises. Similar disappearances had occurred at plantations throughout Louisiana and neighboring states. Workers matching Margaret's preferred profile had been vanishing across the region. Local authorities dismissed these as voluntary departures, but a pattern suggests a coordinated effort to test psychological control techniques on massive scale. Court records from 3 parishes showed similar patterns: dismissed missing person reports, forged documentation, active investigation discouragement. The consortium had systematically placed sympathetic officials in key legal positions, creating protective networks allowing experimental programs to operate without interference. As Marshall Hendricks prepared for final confrontation, he realized he faced more than a rescue mission. He was exposing a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of Southern society. Consortium members had resources, connections, and desperation that would make them extremely dangerous if threatened. Time was running out. Dr. Boudreau revealed Margaret was planning to conclude her current experimental phase within days. Subjects showing regression would be disposed of, while successfully conditioned workers would be transferred to other facilities for advanced training. If the federal raid failed or arrived late, dozens would disappear forever into a psychological slavery network that could spread throughout the South. If you're still here, get ready. The final truth will change everything you thought you knew. On April 28, 1865, Marshall Hendricks led 12 federal agents and 20 Union soldiers in a raid that would become one of the most significant operations in Reconstruction history. What they discovered beneath Margaret Beaumont's mansion would shock battle-hardened Civil War veterans and expose the depths of human cruelty disguised as moral reform. Margaret stood on her veranda as the federal force approached, dressed in customary black mourning attire, appearing like a dignified Southern lady receiving unexpected guests. Her composure was so complete that Marshall Hendricks briefly questioned Dr. Boudreau's testimony. "Gentlemen," Margaret said with perfect politeness, "I assume you have warrants for this intrusion." I hope you'll conduct business quickly with minimal disruption to my workers' routine. Margaret's facade cracked when Marshal Hendricks produced arrest warrants charging kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy against freed slave civil rights. As agents moved toward the house, her carefully constructed composure crumbled. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," she said, voice rising. "These people needed guidance, structure, someone to save them from their so-called freedom's chaos. I was helping them, teaching them, giving them purpose they could never find alone." Claude Thibodeau attempted resistance but was quickly subdued. His pockets contained detailed subject management schedules and keys essential for accessing the underground complex. The entrance was concealed behind a false basement wall, accessible only through Margaret's hidden mechanism. Descending into tunnels, federal agents were struck by sophisticated engineering and industrial scale. This wasn't a crude prison, but carefully designed facility representing months of planning and thousands of dollars. The first level yielded immediate evidence. In comfortable but locked rooms, investigators found 7 individuals reported missing over 6 months. Their physical condition was relatively good, clean, well-fed, no obvious abuse signs. But their psychological state was profoundly disturbing. Isabella Chin greeted agents with polite confusion. She insisted she had always lived at Beaumont Plantation, that Mrs. Beaumont was a protector, and had no memory of life before arriving. When shown her own letters to her Mississippi sister, she examined them with genuine bewilderment, as if reading a stranger's correspondence. Thomas Mitchell was found in the second-level workshop, meticulously crafting furniture for Margaret's house. He worked with obvious skill and pride, but when questioned about family and previous employment, responded with rehearsed phrases all subjects had been conditioned to recite. Mrs. Beaumont saved me from confusion and gave me purpose. I am grateful for her guidance and protection. The third level revealed the full horror. The chemical laboratory contained detailed psychological experimentation records rivaling European medical institutions. Margaret had systematically tested drug combinations, isolation, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation to determine the most effective identity-breaking and personality-rebuilding methods. Her notebooks contain meticulous observations of each subject progress through personality dissolution and behavioral reconstruction. She documented precise drug dosages for memory confusion, optimal isolation duration for breaking resistance, and most effective reward-punishment combinations for encouraging compliance. Margaret had conducted parallel studies on different subject groups, testing various approaches to determine which techniques produced the most stable psychological changes. Some subjects received chemical treatments, others purely psychological manipulation, and a third group received combined approaches. The fourth and deepest level revealed the ultimate fate of subjects whose conditioning failed. Here, investigators found evidence that 8 individuals had been murdered when Margaret determined their psychological reconstruction unsuccessful. The bodies had been dissolved using chemical processes learned from medical correspondence. But among the disposal equipment, investigators found Margaret's detailed before and after psychological profiles of each subject, including original memories, personalities, and life histories. She had intended to use this information for comprehensive medical journal publications. Dr. Eugene Cartwright, a mental disorder specialist accompanying the raid, immediately recognized the significance. These documents provide a complete roadmap for reversing psychological conditioning. If we understand exactly what was done to each individual, we may help them recover their original identities. Margaret's final defiance came as investigators cataloged evidence. Realizing her world was collapsing, she attempted to destroy incriminating documents by setting fire to her records room. Agents saved most evidence, but Margaret destroyed correspondence revealing her consortium's full regional operations. During arrest, Margaret maintained conviction in her legitimate research. "History will vindicate my methods," she declared in chains. These people were lost without proper guidance, and I gave them structure, purpose, meaning. Future generations will understand I was ahead of my time. Margaret's trial began July 15, 1865, in New Orleans federal court, drawing national attention as one of the first major prosecutions of post-Civil War crimes against freed slaves. She was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. She died in federal prison in 1873. Still maintaining her research had been misunderstood. The investigation into the Southern Agricultural Improvement Society continued 2 years, exposing similar operations in 7 states and prosecuting 43 individuals. Of 7 Beaumont survivors, 5 eventually recovered their identities and memories with Dr. Cartwright's treatment. Samuel Washington received federal commendation and Freedmen's Bureau employment, spending his life helping expose crimes against freed slaves throughout Reconstruction. But the most chilling legacy was what investigators never found. Margaret's correspondence referenced 12 other experimental facilities throughout the Deep South. Despite extensive investigations, authorities never located all facilities or determined how many people disappeared into them. In 1895, railroad construction through former plantation grounds discovered additional underground chambers containing remains of 15 more individuals, plus evidence Margaret's operation had been active much longer than realized, possibly dating to before the Civil War. The Beaumont case established important legal precedents for federal civil rights prosecutions and influenced protective law development. Modern historians note Margaret's techniques anticipated 20th century totalitarian mind control methods, providing blueprints later refined into what became known as brainwashing. Recent genealogical research has identified disappearance patterns in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia matching the Beaumont profile. Statistical analysis suggests hundreds of freed slaves may have vanished into similar Reconstruction-era operations. The question haunting investigators in 1865 challenges historians today. How many Margaret Beaumont existed in post-Civil War South? How many freed slaves disappeared into facilities where identities were systematically destroyed and rebuilt? How many operations were never discovered? The answers may never be fully known, but Beaumont case stands as testament to both human cruelty's depths and survival resilience. It reminds us that legal slavery's end didn't end the freedom struggle, and vigilance against those who would control others remains as important today as in 1865. Some say on quiet Louisiana nights, when mist rises from swamps where Beaumont Plantation stood, you can still hear echoes of voices calling from underground chambers never found. Voices of people whose names were erased, identities stolen, stories buried beneath moss-covered ruins where horrors beyond imagination once masqueraded as moral improvement. Perhaps most disturbing, scattered throughout Reconstruction records are references to other plantations, other disappearances, other mysterious benefactors who promised to help freed slaves find their place in the New World. Margaret Beaumont's network may have been larger, more sophisticated, and more successful than anyone discovered. The truth about how many vanished into these psychological prisons may be lost to history, but their stories and the warning about unchecked power disguised as benevolence remain as relevant today as 150 years ago. And don't miss our next video. Subscribe to the channel and enter the placelet, and follow other stories so intriguing and frightening like this. Click on the screen to watch it now.